that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh, Mother Mary, generate the song that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh, Mother Mary, generate the song that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh, Mother Mary, generate the song that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh, Mother Mary, generate the song that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh, Mother Mary, generate the song that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh, Mother Mary, generate the song that does accelerate my mind into a peaceful state. God's perfect love I radiate. Oh.
I am the Ascended Master, Mother Mary. And my beloved, when you experience a discourse like the one you have just experienced from Jesus, I am reminded of when I was in embodiment with Jesus and would sometimes sit there almost in a state of awe when I heard him speak. It was said in the Bible that no man spoke as this man, and certainly Jesus has a way with words that is very unique and very beautiful. And even as an Ascended Master, I can certainly experience, of course, a dictation I experience in a different way because I experience both the Ascended Being who is speaking as he is in the Ascended realm, but I also experience what is coming through the messenger. And when you consider the difficulty, the distance in vibration, the distance in the level of consciousness, when you consider how dense the earth is, then you see the difficulty of bringing the being of an Ascended Master through words spoken in this realm. And you must admire the ability of Jesus to bring forth so much of his being in this dense realm. And you must almost be in awe of the whole process of how this is even possible to communicate from the Ascended realm through an undescended messenger. Sometimes we know that our students can come to take this for granted and feel that, oh well, it seems so easy, the messenger just gets up there and closes his eyes and then it starts flowing. But when you consider the density of this realm, it truly is a unique process that you should not become comfortable with to the point where you take it for granted. So what I wish to do today is to bring you sort of the Omega perspective on Jesus' discourse. Now, every time we talk about bringing the judgment of Christ and challenging the fallen beings, there is always a certain percentage of you who have a reaction to this. And it is not that I'm in any way condemning you for having this reaction. I am going to point out to you that there are two aspects of why you have a reaction, why you might feel hesitant, why you might feel this is not for you, does this really apply to me, what should I do, I don't see myself as an outgoing person, and many other thoughts you might have. Well, my beloved, as Jesus said, the primary weapon of the fallen beings is doubt. And many of you, of course, have this doubt. In fact, all of you who have not resolved your birth trauma will have doubt, the doubt of the fallen beings. And so there's part of the reaction you can have that is simply based on this. You haven't resolved your primal self. And therefore you feel this hesitation, and I can assure you that when you resolve the primal self, you will no longer feel that hesitation, at least when you make the shift that Jesus talked about. Nevertheless, what I want to get to is that, as Jesus said, it is not in all of you in your divine plan to ascend after this lifetime, but likewise it is not for all of you that it is in your divine plan to go out and challenge the fallen beings in some overt way. What Jesus was talking about was the alpha aspect of challenging the fallen beings, where you speak out about their ideas, and perhaps you are even willing to confront them on a personal level and let them attack you so they can receive that judgment of Christ. But for others of you, this is not in your divine plan. This is not how you specified expressing Christhood in your divine plan. And of course, Christhood, as everything else, has an alpha and an omega side. So what is the omega way of challenging the fallen beings and bringing the judgment of Christ on the fallen beings? Well, my beloved, it is to love them. And this may be on a personal level, where you have chosen to be in a relationship, whether family or another relationship, with fallen beings. You have chosen to closely associate yourself with certain fallen beings. And if you tune in and see what is in your divine plan, you may realize that it would actually be a misunderstanding for you to decide with your outer mind, based on the teachings that have been given, that now I need to challenge these people. If you have a dominant personality in your sphere of acquaintances, then I need to challenge that person. Or if you get a sense that a certain person might be a fallen being, you need to challenge them. But I am asking you to tune in and not to start challenging anybody until you know what is in your divine plan, until you feel that this comes from within. It's not that you need to have a visual impression of your divine plan and then you go out and challenge the fallen beings. You go on your intuition. If you feel intuitively prompted to challenge someone, you do, but you don't decide with your outer mind that you should challenge them. I'm asking, especially those of you who feel hesitant, I'm asking you to first of all work on your birth trauma, but even when you overcome the birth trauma, I'm asking you to tune in and see, is it actually my choice to go out and challenge people? Or was it my choice to love people instead? And then you need to recognize that in order to fulfill your highest desire and potential for your divine plan, we're not talking about loving the fallen beings in a human way. We are talking about loving them in what we have called an unconditional way. And I would like to talk about the difference. You see, my beloved, an unconditional way, an unconditional love can only be brought forth when you have resolved your birth trauma, when you are an avatar. And if you're not an avatar, but one of the original inhabitants of the earth, you need to rise to a high level of Christhood before you can express unconditional love. Because conditional love is, of course, based on unresolved psychology. So it is often what we have called possessive love, where you think you love somebody, but you are doing it because you think that person can give you something that either completes yourself or obscures your wound, so you don't feel it. That is why when people are in love, they are in a state of euphoria, they don't feel their wounds, they are on cloud 9, and everything is wonderful. It's simply because they are not seeing the wound right now, they're not dealing with it, and then when the honeymoon is over, now they start feeling their wounds again, and then they project that, oh, this person wasn't the true love that I'm longing for, so I need to look for somebody else. And this can, of course, go on over and over and over again. Now, so as long as you have these wounds, and especially the birth trauma, you will not be able to be the open door for unconditional love. And you can take, of course, the situation described in My Lives book with the judgment of Lucifer, where the protagonist expresses unconditional love for Lucifer. And that is Lucifer's final opportunity. Will he respond to someone he has known in physical embodiment expressing that unconditional love? And if the fallen being does not respond to unconditional love, then that is the judgment of that fallen being, the judgment of Christ. And so there may be some of you that feel that this is what you're meant to do. You have a certain person in your sphere of influence, and you feel you should not challenge them. It is not your role to change them. It is simply your role to show them a different way, a different state of consciousness, and therefore ultimately come to the point where you can express unconditional love. Perhaps these are not necessarily fallen beings. Perhaps they are human beings. They may be original inhabitants of the earth. There may even be other avatars who can be transformed when they experience a different form of love than they have experienced here on earth. And this is certainly one way to demonstrate that there is a different state of consciousness. In other words, it is perfectly correct in the alpha aspect of Christhood to express certain viewpoints and ideas, and to even challenge other ideas and explain why they are dualistic and why they are not the highest possible. But the omega aspect is to demonstrate a different state of consciousness through unconditional love, through loving other people. And of course, this applies to your family members as well, whether they are fallen beings or not. And I'm not, of course, telling you to go around looking at every person you meet and trying to judge with the outer mind, is this a fallen being or not? And then you can create all these criteria in your mind that when people behave such and such, they must be fallen beings. Now, my beloved, we have seen in the previous Ascended Master dispensations where an entire organization with thousands of members could develop a very judgmental culture. And in some cases, people were convinced that these other people are fallen beings. And we have seen how this can develop into almost like a competition sport where people compete about being able to expose who is a fallen being and who is not. And they go around accusing other people, and they basically think that anybody who disagrees with them must be a fallen being. And this is, of course, not a balanced state to be in. And this is not what we are encouraging. Neither are we encouraging you to go into what is found in the world that is called sympathy for the devil, where you think that you have to love everybody. Jesus spoke about the people in the New Age community who will not acknowledge anything evil, but there are other people who may acknowledge that there is evil in the world, but they think the way to overcome it is through love. And it is true, the way to overcome evil is through love, but it has to be unconditional love. Otherwise, if it is possessive love, then they will simply use that love to pull you into a reactionary pattern. And there are indeed some of you who will need to see that in order to step up to the highest potential of your divine plan, you need to recognize that you have been in relationships in a relationship with a certain fallen being for many lifetimes. And you will need to come to that point where you identify this, and then you need to look at what are the wounds, what are the mechanisms that have tied you to this fallen being. You need to look at what are the beliefs behind it, and ultimately you will come to the realization that at some level of your being, you thought that you could change that fallen being. By being in a relationship, by loving them, whatever you thought you could change them. And that is when you need to step up and internalize what Jesus said about the absoluteness of free will, that you are not here to change anyone else, fallen being or not. But you could say you are especially not here to change the fallen being, because the original inhabitants of the earth, if you attempt to change them, in many cases they will ignore you. But a fallen being will not ignore you if you attempt to change them. They will use you. They will use your desire to change them, to tie you to them, and to, at the very least, extract your energy, steal your energy, but in other cases to actually manipulate you or even seek to destroy you through your desire to reform a fallen being. So you really have, as an avatar, to come to a point where you recognize if you have been in this pattern, if you have a desire to change the fallen being, and then you have to completely let that go. You have to let that self die, because you cannot manifest Christhood if you are in this state, which is basically a reactionary pattern to the fallen beings. And the desire to reform the fallen beings will always spring from your birth trauma, where you were exposed to them for the first time and you were shocked, and then you somehow created this, in many cases, very long step-by-step reasoning process that led you to conclude that what the fallen beings have done to you demonstrated what they have done to the planet. So the best way that you could help change the planet was to select a specific fallen being, go into a close relationship with that fallen being, and try to reform them. And this then becomes part of your primal self. There can be many other things as part of the primal self where you think you have to bring about certain changes on earth. But one of them is the desire to change a fallen being. And you cannot actually truly resolve your primal self until you first look at this desire to change a fallen being and let go of it. You give it up because you recognize the absoluteness of free will. You recognize that's not why you're here. So the desire to change a fallen being is not the core of your primal self. The core of your primal self is your reaction to the trauma or the violence you were exposed to, or the deception, whatever it may be. But in response to that trauma, you created the self that wants to reform a fallen being. You could say it's an aspect of your primal self, but it wasn't how your primal self started, and that is why, in order to get down to the core of your primal self, you have to first let go of this desire to reform a fallen being. And this, of course, brings up the topic of, can fallen beings be reformed? And I will ask you to consider a more specific question. Could I ever reform a fallen being? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. There is nothing that you could do or say that would reform a fallen being. For that matter, there is nothing you could do or say that would change any other human being. Why is this? Because of free will. Now, does this mean that you are powerless, that it's pointless of you to be here? No. But what does it take for another human being to change? What would it take for a fallen being to be changed and go on an upward path? They have to make a choice. You can't force other people's choices. You can force their behavior. And this is what the fallen beings have been attempting